quickly introduce myself. I'm Omar. I'm the BizDev Director at Aptoide. Quick show of hands, how many people here know Aptoide? Okay, half the room. Huh? Yeah, okay, it counts, the last 2 days. Okay, so hopefully by the end of the presentation, you have a bit more idea about Aptoide and what exactly alternative distribution means for mobile game developers. Starting with, if I want to start with the current state of the global app market today. We know that it's a huge market. We're looking at 235 billion revenues just for apps alone. There's more than 7 billion people globally using a mobile device. So for reference, that's 90% of the population using a mobile phone. But we know it's a challenging market for developers. We know that developers spend 30 to 40% of their budgets on user acquisition, making it very difficult for them to scale. So 30 to 40% on user acquisition, which makes it really difficult to scale. And on top of that, the big gatekeepers like Apple and Google to take 30% of their revenue from the developers. So, you know, with this market complexity, we see that for developers, it's very difficult for them to scale their apps and reach more users. And this is why it's really important to start looking at alternative channels of distribution. If we look at specifically what Google's done over the years, everyone has said that Google specifically, we see that Google has built a fortress to ensure that they have a monopoly in their own app store. So this includes self-preferencing in search results, forcing mobile manufacturers to pre-install the Google Play on their phone, and basically creating many different barriers for developers to monetize and distribute outside of their app store. So we go back to where the regulations have started to take shape and, you know, make an impact. So who here remembers 4 years ago when Epic sued Apple and Google because they took down Fortnite? Does anyone remember that? So part of the reason for that is Fortnite insisted on, you know, implementing their own payment solution within the app. Apple didn't like it because Apple obviously takes 30% of revenue, and that's when the whole debacle started. But this was a really important move because we know that, you know, Epic being a huge platform, developer, and Fortnite being a massive game, this makes an impact on actually what it means to have alternative platforms and alternative payment models. So eventually, Epic actually won their claim against Google and Apple. And then outside of the US, we also see that in the UK and Japan, very similar regulations have started to come into effect. So in the UK, you have the Digital Markets Competition Act, and in Japan, you have the Japan Smartphone Act. And here, specifically in the EU, we have the Digital Markets Act. Looking at the EU in particular and what the EU Digital Market Acts represent. So back in March this year, Google, Meta, all the big tech players were basically mandated to start complying with the Digital Markets Act. So what this means is that they need to start making sure that they play a fair game. So Google, for example, they've stopped self-preferencing themselves in search results. So before that, primarily when you go to Google and you do a search, Google search results always come up, and anything that is on Google Play or any Google platform comes up on top of the list. So since March, they've stopped doing that. Meta has also has started taking less data from users in the EU. And then in June this year, EU started fining Apple over violation of the DMA. And more recently, last week, Apple is also going to be the first to get fined over continued violation of the DMA. And this is looking to be like 10% of their global revenue, which, as you know, for Apple, it's in the billions. And that's going to be a huge impact. If we move to the next one. So specifically for the DMA and what this means for developers, in case developers don't know, the value and the main benefit of the DMA is that finally now you're not just tied to Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. Finally, you can decide and monetize and distribute across different channels of stores. So you're not just tied down to the two monopoly players, but you can actually start looking at, okay, do I want to target the Asian market? Do I want to target LATAM because there's more users there and they know that there's a better community? This is all now possible, and this is now all available to you. And another benefit of the DMA is that you can actually set your own pricing, you can set your own promotion, whereas before, platforms will sort of, force you to pick and choose what sort of pricing that you need to implement for your game or your app. And this is now, that freedom is now with you. If we move to the next one. So now we get to Aptoide a little bit. This working? Thank you. So we get to Aptoide a little bit. So actually, Aptoide has been around for, I want to say 13 years, but it started to make waves more than 10 years ago. So Apple sort of became like, this David and Goliath, so to speak, where they took on Google, filing a antitrust claim against Google that Google was not playing fairly in the app space. Google retaliated a couple of years later by saying that the Aptoide platform was malicious. So within 2 months, Aptoide lost over 2 million users. Not great, being at a party and everyone saying a nasty rumor about you. But then in 2018 as well, the EU stepped in and fined Google for basically violating, antitrust rules here in the EU. But then we continued fighting, and then in 2019, we also did a similar case in the US against Google that they weren't playing fair and they were not letting competitors compete fairly in the app space. So we also launched a Level the Game initiative in 2019. This is basically letting developers know what their options are when it comes to the Digital Markets Act, and letting them know that outside of the two main traditional app stores, there's more opportunities and more options out there. So we have a little video specifically just about Aptoide in particular, which I'm not sure if there's a audio, but it's okay. So when looking at Aptoide and when I talk to developers about what Aptoide represents, it's really about all the different channels that you can access outside of the traditional app stores that we have currently. So we have a console, Aptoide, that's a distribution platform, and through the Aptoide console, you can go to our own app store for iOS and Android, but then we also have global partners like the Xiaomi App Store, Oppo, Roostore, all these alternative app stores that exist out there, you can reach through a single integration through Aptoide. Then there's also Games Hub, which is in the US, where we partner with telcos like Verizon and T-Mobile. But the idea here is that, it's just giving developers more options and more, choices where they want to monetize and distribute their games. And that's super important, for everyone. So if we look at alternative distribution, I think a couple of years ago, people said that, oh, it's not worth it. It doesn't have it doesn't have the audience, doesn't have the user. It's too much work for me to, integrate a game for many different channels, and the effort is just not the return on value is not there. But we can see now, especially after the DMA in Europe, and now in other markets around the world, this is actually starting to get better. Within the Aptoide ecosystem, we're looking at 50 million daily monthly active users. We have more than 10 distribution partners. So this is actually, like, if you look at just the channels that exist out there, it's great to see that these numbers are getting better, and we see that for the next couple of years, especially with all these regulations coming into play, they're going to continue growing and continue delivering value for developers. So what do we envision in the next 5 years when it comes to alternative channels, alternative distribution? So obviously for us, we know that Google and Apple, they will continue to be the dominant players. They're not going to go away. They're fully invested in these industries, and obviously they're going to have that market lead. But we also see that in the next 5 years, independent platforms, smaller alternative distribution channels like Aptoide, they'll also take a bigger share of the market, and it wouldn't just be 95% going to Apple and Google, but actually a bigger chunk of that is going to go to other distribution channels. We also think that direct-to-consumer is going to be really interesting. I think for developers, directly reaching their users and their gamers audience is going to be important, especially when we talk about communities and we talk about building that relationship with your user base. So that's another shift that we see happening in the next 5 years. And that's basically it. I don't know if there's any questions.
How much due diligence does Aptoide does against people uploading pirated games? How much due diligence does Aptoide does against people uploading pirated games?
I mean, we have a team that looks at illegal content that gets uploaded on the site, and obviously, when you upload a content on Aptoide, you have to prove that you actually own it, and if you're unable to prove it, then it doesn't get published.
Well, because my team's game, a game that we've been nominated here for, is up there, and someone
on Aptoide.
Yeah, it's uploaded as a pirated version.
Did you report it?
Well, I'm planning to. I noticed it today.
It shouldn't happen. I mean, it should be.
I talked to a couple of other developers that have the same issue, and one of them has reported it, taken down, and it's still up.
Okay, that shouldn't be the case because you have to prove ownership. But
Yeah.
we'll check it. Yeah.
Yeah, well.
Any other questions?
Okay, I have one. Do you have any strategic differences between like Asian and European markets and like US markets? Maybe?
Yes.
Yeah.
We do. I think the behavior and the preferences are very unique. Especially China, we look at China quite separately, and even Japan and Korea in the way that users there consume games. Obviously, those markets are quite niche, especially with the type of games that those audiences prefer to play. So when we look at preferences in terms of what we focus to promote and what we focus on, let's say, highlighting for the Aptoide user base, we actually look at the market itself, and we look at, okay, what's going to be interesting and appealing for the local audiences. So definitely. Yep.
Thank you very much. Big round of applause for Omar.